Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 62 of the MMA Outsiders, part 1. Yes, part 1, because we have had some historical significance this week. Obviously, the short week here at Empty the Bench has everything a little shaken up because of the Thanksgiving holiday. But, Zan, you and I both said we would be remiss to not have an episode this week, considering, number one, you were just at Bellator 301 live, so we had some live coverage on our social media page, so we had to talk about it. And number two, obviously the historical significance of what this Bellator event is, and well, it seems the long-awaited news is finally getting out there. So here we are, part 1 of episode 62 of the MMA Outsiders. I'm Tom Albano, that's Zain Bando to my right, and as we already kind of noted last week on social media, as to tune in for like further information about when this part was going to happen, because this first part here it will only be about the significant Bellator news. This part here, part 1, everybody, is only about Bellator. So if you are looking for anything with the PFL World Championships, you're looking for anything about the UFC Vegas 82 card, the Fury Usyk news, that will be discussed later this week on part 2. That'll come out on our normal Tuesday time slot. Right now, we are just solely focused on Bellator, so we'll talk about all Bellator here. Before we do, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the MMA Outsiders and the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure to like us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Instagram at MMA Outsiders ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. To my right is Zain Bando, writer for BJPenn.com, MMA Knockout. My co-host, as always, has been a member of the Bellator Rankings Committee. Obviously, everything there is now in a little bit of question. You can follow him on social media at Zambando99, on Tom Albano, contributor over at Fansided MMA and at MMA News. And I will be live with the PFL this week as updating their website as we have the big PFL World Championships. So find my work over there, and you can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. All right, a lot to break down. So, Zan, first things first, talk a little bit about what your experience was like, the boots on the ground at a very historically significant, not just a card when it comes to Bellator, but just a historically significant card in mixed martial arts.
Yeah, so for those of you who've been following my work for a while, this is my third Bellator event as a member of the media in the last year, and this is the third time that Bellator has come to my neck of the woods since November of 2022. So first things first, I'd like to say before I get into what was Bellator 301 Fight Week, I want to first say thank you to BJPenn.com. I'd like to thank my editor, Chris Taylor, for the opportunity once again and for me to be boots on the ground for such a very significant event. And I'd also like to thank the tremendous support of all my colleagues who were in attendance this week. Many of them share a lot of common interests within the sport of MMA, and we're also very interactive as we have a very kind of exclusive MMA media group chat that we all kind of converse in. So a bunch of us were able to be there and meet for the first time. So it was a very cool networking opportunity. And then again, I'd like to thank everyone at Bellator for making it the week that it was. So essentially, to break down my week, it was a bit of a shorter week than typical Bellators. For those who have been to Bellator events as media, you kind of know the drill by now. Everything starts on Tuesday and ends the night of the fight. For reasons unbeknownst to us, media began on Wednesday. So what happened was, on Wednesday, we all got together at the Hotel Chicago, downtown in the city of Chicago, obviously, and we had a pre-fight media availability, but it was the most unique pre-fight media availability I've ever been to because it just featured all of the main card fighters that were competing on that Friday night's event. hosted by John McCarthy and the Punk Josh Thompson as a part of their weighing in podcast. And for those who know the MMA podcast very well, it's one of the best MMA podcasts out there. So they did a little impromptu weighing in podcast slash Bellator collaboration. So pretty much John McCarthy moderated it and was able to ask the fighters some questions, and he threw it to the media for the media to do or think. I was able to chip in on a question to Raytheon Stotts, and I was just kind of there to observe, take notes. I really didn't know what my story angles were going to be, but they ended up being two interesting pieces. I did one on Rafian Stotts, and I did another on Sergio Pettis, which I felt both did very well to encapsulate two of the biggest fights on the cards. That was what Wednesday looked like for me. Thursday, I was virtual covering the official weigh-ins for the event. I decided not to physically be present at them, and thankfully, I think I made the right decision because in past Bellators, we've been able to get media availability in an impromptu scrum format from Bellator President Scott Coker that was not made available to us that day, and there was really no reason given as to why. Um, Full disclosure, the only public appearances that Coker did make were at the official weigh-ins for Bellator 301, and then of course sitting cage side at the actual event itself. So we get to fight night. The first fight began at 5 p.m. Eastern, and I have to say, and usually this is a criticism of Bellator events in the past. The pacing on this Bellator show, I actually thought was really good, and maybe it was just because I was in the arena, but it just felt like fight after fight after fight is continuing to go on. And I actually think now that I'm thinking about it, the first fight started just a little bit before 4, so by the time I got to my seat and was in the arena, the first round of the first prelim was just about to end, or it already ended. So that's kind of how quickly they got things rolling. And for those who know and who know well, they usually bring the winners back after every fight. Unfortunately, in this event, they only brought select winners back. The only notable prelim fighter that they brought back was Denise Kilcoats, who won her fight. So it was cool and interesting to get insights from her. But then, of course, all of the major names that you were expecting to hear from Alexander Shabili, Raytheon Stotts, AJ McKee, um, obviously the main event winner, Jason Jackson, and of course, Patchy mixed with his 2 belts. We got to hear from all of them. So overall, it was a very successful event with a lot of people that I admire and respect in the MMA media space, and it was just great to say that I had another event checked off my bucket list. And it was kind of one of those events where it was somber, but it was also like a celebration. We were all there doing what we love to do, and the people who were going to this event have been excited to go to this event for a couple of months, myself included. So it was just nice that everything kind of worked out as well as it possibly could. I really didn't know what to expect from a fight perspective, but I thought the fights were good, and I just thought overall that everyone there from a media perspective did a very good job. Everybody handled themselves very, very well and very professionally, and I just want to say thank you again to everybody that was part of it. Thank you to everyone who followed along, both from an ETV perspective and to BJPen.com perspective. And thank you to those, whether you're a fan, media member, or promoter that tuned in to even a little bit of this event. In any capacity, Bellator was really grateful for all the support they got, and overall, from a quality perspective, I don't think it could have gone any better. Tom, I'm going to throw it to you and ask you what you thought of my coverage this week overall, and just kind of the vibes from the event from an outsider perspective, because I'd like to hear what you have to say too.
Okay, so yeah, so I thought you did a great job with it. I see you definitely enjoyed yourself, and you definitely got some information. I love the question you asked Stotts because it definitely caused a little thing between he and Sabatel. Not that they weren't going at it already, but you could see it definitely added to the tenseness of their fight and really emphasized just how it was. And kind of like what you said before, your piece with Stotts, your piece with Patchy definitely helped to like I said, showcase, highlight two of the bigger fights, two of the more highlighted fighters of this card, Both ended up winning their fights. Rafion won his fight with Sabatello again. And then Patchy Mix defeating Sergio Pettis to become Bellator Bantamweight champion. From an outside perspective, it definitely felt like when I was watching on TV, it definitely felt, this might be a little extreme to say, but funeral like. Like, it's the end. Like, like, hey, it Bellator, like I mentioned, Mauro Ranallo straight out as the broadcast started said that it was the final Bellator on Showtime, which I tweeted out and I said, well, take for that what you will. And then the show ended. They actually had Big John and Mauro both on the analyst desk where Amanda and where Josh Thompson normally are, and they basically were reflecting on Bellator's time with Showtime over the course of 2023. And basically, the idea, I think even Thompson said something like that we didn't know what the future held, but it's been a tremendous ride. And the show actually ended. I could have sworn they had put this out earlier in the week, Zan. Did you see a little graphic? Then it said Bellator and it said like "Legacy lives on."
I did. They
Okay,
actually, and they
what
actually played like a that. Now that you say that, they actually played like a tribute video in the arena with all of Bellator's greatest moments wrapped up into like a 3-minute montage, and it was part of that graphic that they had showed right before that. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, well, I brought that up because that's what the show ended on, like where the fighter like videos would play, and it was
Right.
it was just a close up shot of that Bellator Legacy Lives On image. So that's what I mean by funeral. Like for all that they were saying of, oh, they didn't know what the future held, and that it was the final one on Showtime. They definitely acted like it was the last Bellator ever.
That's interesting to note, just because I'm not sure if you're aware, but we unless you bring like an external device, we don't hear commentaries. But to hear this insight that that's how it was being painted from like a production standpoint is very interesting. And obviously, we don't get monitors to even remotely see what the television viewers are seeing at home. So to even hear that insight and to hear that that's how it was being painted is very unique and good to know. Well, because I think if we knew that, I think we would have maybe. Now, I'm not saying everybody would have done this, but at least from my perspective and my coverage, I think I would have framed some of my post fight remarks a little bit differently had I known that ahead of time. So it's very good to know that that was the case, and just kind of the perspective in which they were coming from. And thank you very much for the very nice compliment. I greatly appreciate it. I was able to pump out, I think it was about 7 stories in total for the week. So I'm very proud of the coverage that I was able to do, and to try to give the event as much life as it possibly could. I didn't really know what to expect, as I alluded to a couple of minutes ago, but what I did know was I wanted to make sure that my angles were clean, concise, and just pieces that people will remember. And I feel like I was able to do that. And also another thing that was interesting to me too is just the respect that the fighters showed in thanking everyone that had ever been associated with Bellator, and just how much the fighters appreciate the promotion as a whole. I thought that was very touching. It was just like a very like personal connection type of feel from a media perspective. It almost felt like Bellator truly cared about us as much as they cared about everybody else competing, and that will always have a lasting impact on me. And I think you made a very good point from a TV perspective, because in some ways it felt similarly from a media perspective, but in other ways it didn't. So good to know.
Which is actually funny you say that because the ending, you had Morrow, Big John, Josh, man, that they were thanking all the behind the scenes people.
Interesting. Okay. Very, very
So
interesting.
we got that feeling too. And Ariel Helwani did that on social media. I saw a bunch of posts basically thanking the Bellator PR team, Bellator PR members like Danny, CJ, basically all saying this is one to tune in for and basically thanking everybody. So, I mean, It definitely felt very funeral-like, and it felt like everyone was promoting as if it was the last one, like, it could be the last Bellator ever, but then, I guess, Zan, do you wanna get right into the headline?
Yeah, so it came out shortly after the event. Tom, before I continue, who was the first to report this before I go into it?
So, there were a couple of different sources, so, the first time that I saw it from was from, I'm double checking, what's his name? Magic M MMA, Magic M MMA Bets. Then I saw a couple of others post about it, like Alzolino reposted basically Magic M's post. So it got around right after that.
Okay, so that's good to know. So for those of you who aren't aware, and we're going to get more into this in part two, but the PFL has arguably their biggest event of the calendar year. Is Thanksgiving weekend in Washington DC on Black Friday, which Tom alluded to. He will be covering for the PFL's website, so be sure to check that out. But before we get more into that, a big overarching story, and a story that I feel like we really didn't get a chance to ask a whole lot about for the reasons that I mentioned previously when I was going over my week and everything that I did. By the way, really quick before I get in this, shout out to Patchy Mix 5 to 6 hours before his fight, being able to meet with me and being able to give me some of his time and just get to know him a little bit. I'm very thankful for that, and he had a tremendous performance. We'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, back to what I was saying previously. So the overarching story of this event and the story that I think everybody's going to be talking about is the PFL 99.9% sure expecting to announce an acquisition of Bellator on Thanksgiving night ahead of the PFL World Championships. And to me, I just feel like this report, and you probably feel similar to this, Tom. I just feel like this report brings about more questions than actual answers as to what this literally means. We've heard rumors that Bellator is going to fold into the PFL. We've also heard very credible reports that Bellator is going to run on its own for 2 years before dissolving into it. What do you make of this report? What do you make of the PFL doing this on Thanksgiving night when it frankly there's other things to be worried about, not just in the sports world, but in the world outside of an acquisition purchase. Can you kind of talk to me a little bit about
Yeah.
what you think this report means? What could come of it? What do you think?
I mean, first of all, to be quite frank, and all due respect to the PFL, like I get it. It's the night of the weigh-ins, so it's the day before the PFL World Championship. So obviously, they're gonna have media stuff on that day. But you know, I'm gonna be here with my family, so I'll keep an eye on it. But like you said, there's obviously more important things that day. In terms of media, like in terms of the media space, obviously it's gonna have a lot of competition because you got the three NFL games going on Thanksgiving. I mean, they Black Friday, there's an NFL game as well, but that's in the afternoon, so that's not gonna really impact the PFL World Championships broadcast. Again, we'll get more into that on part 2 later this week, but I feel like I feel like Wednesday might be a better day for it, so that way you're not taking away from your World Championships card.
I
So,
agree. Do you expect? Because I can see this happening. Maybe you disagree with me, but I could very well see a scenario that someone leaks this and the whole press conference goes up in smoke because everybody already knows what is being announced. Could you see that being a possibility, or do you think the PFL is going to keep this as tight as they can?
I think they're gonna keep this as tight as they can, and I think that, I feel like one way or another, whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, I mean, they're obviously going to make some sort of buzz about this. Like, obviously, this is a very major headline, a very critical headline when it comes to the MMA sphere of today and in terms of MMA history. Um, that being said, what do I make of all this? I mean, Zan, originally I was thinking, okay, maybe Alzolino was right all along, that it's going to be two different leagues. It'll run it for 2 years, like a la a UFC, what they did with Strikeforce and what they did with the WEC. But the whole funeral aspect of everything when it came to the Bellator 301 card kind of leads me to believe one of two things, Zan. Number one, it will be run for a couple of years, but behind the scenes people, maybe even Morrow and Big John won't be brought aboard. Like it'll be the PFL's own people who will be doing that stuff, and whoever the PFL brings on. Number two, like the whole atmosphere from Bellator 301 and all the thanking and the Bellator lives on and how it could be the last show leads me to think maybe they won't run it like two leagues. Maybe they'll just fold it into, as you said before, fold it into the PFL right away.
Very well said. So I guess I know this is getting more technical, but let's just say that it does run as two separate promotions. And now this is more of a geeky question, but this is how I operate because I like to know all the different intricacies. If this actually happens and they run as two separate promotions, Tom, what in the world is ESPN going to do when it comes to delegating their coverage, considering 90% of it is dedicated to the UFC? Do you think there's going to be some sort of gray area if this new version of Bellator that we're calling it, quote unquote, is going to go that route? Or do you think they find a different broadcast partner and going back to DAZN or another partner that, quite frankly, we don't know about in order to fill that void? Because to be quite honest with you, if I'm a television exec or if I'm someone very close to that decision, I would be nervous.
First of all, to what you were referring to before with ESPN, I mean, it almost feels, I think I've said this before, it feels monopolistic in a way because they're going to have, if it's run by two separate promotions, UFC, Bellator, and PFL. Number two, I guess you're kind of right. As a television executive, you might be a little iffy about taking on Bellator if it's true that Bellator is only going to run for a couple of years, and it's essentially it could be seen as like a feeder fed during that time. I'm gonna throw one at you.
Okay.
Could you see, because you know how ESPN is, worldwide leader that about everything, they want all the content. Like I've used this expression before of ESPN when it came to the cuts earlier this year, content over commentators. Could you see a scenario where Bellator becomes exclusively ESPN plus, like it's never on mainstream ESPN?
No, I don't think so. Just because I think Bellator is a big enough brand name to where it's shown that if you put on the right fights, it can do well on major cable television. So no, unless there's a desperate situation where they have to do it because of an overflow of content on linear, then no, I do not see them going that route.
Okay.
Whatsoever.
Okay. Follow up question. Could you
Okay.
see a scenario where Bellator is on cable per se, but is never on the main ESPN channel? In other words, Bellator, if you want it, you'll only see it on ESPN2, or if ESPN2 has stuff, maybe on ESPN News.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see it, and then maybe, obviously, this is a huge question mark. Maybe once a year, or this is a 2-year thing potentially. Maybe twice you'll see Bellator hit the main 4 letters, but outside of that, yeah, yes.
Stan, I think you are right. You could see it hit the main 4 letters. I think the only way that happens, however, is if it's summertime and ESPN1 needs the content because UFC would air on ABC.
Right, or you could see a scenario where they could have a bunch of Friday nights open in the middle of July in August, and they need a 3-hour bill.
That too.
Yeah. Very, very well said.
Yeah, so I could only see Bellator being on the main ESPN1 channel on, like I said, during the summertime. Everything else, I think it'll be 2 or News. And then college football time, maybe I could see it only being a plus exclusive because obviously college football is king. Even the UFC bows to college football.
Oh yeah, which is why you could probably attest to this. Would you or would you not agree that 70% of all UFC events are ESPN Plus exclusive anyway, just because of everything else that ESPN has on
Right.
linear.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because, during the fall, they've got college football, and then Zan, after college football, they got NBA basketball or NHL hockey, or, you know, heaven forbid, sometimes these specials are coming up. Like December 30th, obviously the UFC is not going to have a card, but December 30th, they're doing Monday Night Football on Saturday night because of New Year's. So, and then during the springtime, what MLB games are being
The
shown,
Masters.
the Masters. So they ESPN has all this, Disney has all this content that's why, like you said, 70% of UFC cards are ESPN Plus, not counting obviously the pay-per-view cards.
Right. Exactly. For sure.
So overall, like I said, I want to believe that Bellator is going to be run as a second separate promotion, but considering the logistics of how everything would work with television, considering, what fighter would go where, considering, yeah, and also considering just how the Bellator of that about to potentially be the last one. That's why I'm fearing, what I fear is that this could actually be the end of Bellator. Like you said before, that it just folds in completely. And that's part of the announcement rather than being on as a second separate promotion.
So I guess if all these Bellator fighters are going to be coming in and they have all these seasons currently going on and they have their stars that they're building around, just the integration of all of these current champions that could be going over there, I just don't know how they're going to, compose a balancing act to make the fans happy because I feel like no matter what the PFL decides to do, the fans are going to complain one way or another. And it's going to be like,
It's lose lose. It's lose lose.
right, right. The only thing I fear is these Bellator champions that are absolute studs, at least almost every single one of them, just being put in mismatches that they don't deserve. But that's another discussion for another day. I guess to wrap up this segment and to wrap up this part one that we have, let's go over the actual fights themselves. I want to get your thoughts on just overall this main card. So let's start with the main event. I accurately called this one uh, Jason
You called
Jackson.
the midweek switch up. You went with me during the episode, and you switched midweek, and you got it.
Yeah, I got it. So Jason Jackson went in, Jamaica zone and knocked out what looked to be an unbeatable Vladislav Amosov in very devastating fashion. And truly, Tom, I was sitting there cage side, and we were all just blown away. We could
I
not
thought
believe.
Amosov was in complete control. I thought Amosov was doing a pretty good job and was basically winning the grappling game. And then Jason Jackson, like I kind of alluded to last week, like could it happen? He laid in some power shots, and Amosov just folded up.
Yeah, he gave some insight that the last 10 days of training were in his words very intense. He had him and Robbie Lawler just consistently hitting the pads, hitting his timing down every single day. And once he found the perfect shot, it totally changed. And when you have a former UFC welterweight champion in your corner, good things are more than likely going to happen. And that's what happened and how the fight played out. But we have never seen Yaroslav Amosov in a kind of danger number one. And I don't think I've ever seen Jason Jackson striking look as smooth as it did in this fight, maybe going all the way back to 2020 when he beat Ben Henderson. That is to be one of his best Bellator performance, if not his best Bellator performance that he's ever had.
I think so too. And Jason Jackson was one of these guys, then that we talked about. We said, a couple of years ago, well, maybe he could be, he could have a run for the championship, and ultimately he gets his first title shot here, and he makes the most of it. So, I mean, Zan, if Bellator really is going to wrap up, I definitely say he has to wrap up in a pretty solid way with a knockout like Jason Jackson had and him holding the gold. Like, obviously it would stink if it ended and, he never got to defend, not to be a defending champion, not to make the last walkout. But, for Jason Jackson, at least you get to end Bellator on top. Like, outside of the post-fight stuff, you are one of the last images that people see on a Bellator broadcast.
For sure. I mean, that's one of those. That's one of those fights that you'll never forget. And truly, I was just amazed at how quickly the Chicago crowd turned from pulling for Amosov to being an absolute shock. And we were sitting right behind his family, and his family just went ballistic. I thought in plain security was going to have to pull them off the cage because they were going absolutely insane from where it was sitting. It was one of the coolest, most majestic scenes. And you want to talk about being literally nearly front row? I was a row behind where all the VIPs were sitting, and the whole lower bowl just went. No, that's one of those moments when I look back in my career in 40 or 50 years and talk about fights that I've been up close and personal at. That's going to be one that's going to be on the top of the list for me. Just from the sheer incredibleness of just the crowd going absolutely nuts. And truly, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for his team. I'm happy for everybody involved in for Amosov. I'm just devastated because I'm sure he would have loved to have stayed perfect. I'm sure, there were aspirations of, likely maybe in the future, him testing himself at a different weight. He's going to have to go back to the drawing board. But truly, that's what makes MMA so great, is just the unpredictability and the sheer amazement. And that's what Jason Jackson showed on Friday. In a fight that I don't think was getting the buzz it deserved, and sure enough, it delivered. So
For sure. And yeah, congratulations to Jason Jackson. I want to transition because Dan, you talked about fights that didn't get the buzz that didn't deserve. I think the co-main event, and I love Jason Jackson, but I think the co-main event got disrespected when you consider that it was an undisputed title fight. You had a full-on champ and an interim champ, and that also had a spectacular finish with Patchy Mix taking control in the first round, and then well, I mean, he definitely won the grappling battle. He landed some brutal knees to the body of Pettis during that first round, and then taking him down, locking the choke, and getting the submission on Pettis. And Patchy Mix goes from, I remember Zan 3 years ago where he was fighting Juan Archuleta, and Patchy Mix took the first 2 rounds, and all he needed was one more round, and he won the championship. And then Archuleta pulled off the reverse sweep on the scorecards and claimed the championship. And for Patchy Mix, it's been a road back, but he hadn't lost since. He wins the Bellator Bantamweight Grand Prix in just some really spectacular fashions, and defeating a former champion Kyoji Horiguchi, submitting Magomedov, which was a jaw dropper to me, and then brutally knocking out Rafion Stotts in like 80 seconds. And then he goes and does this. Patchy Mix has had one of the best modern Bellator runs ever since coming so close, but dropping that fight with Archuleta for a vacant title.
would you argue this is the single best Bellator run by a champion since Michael Chandler was in his heyday? Is along with his and with Eddie Alvarez? Are we going like that far to compare Mix to Chandler, or do you think Mix is
No,
just his own?
no, because Zen, Nix wasn't champ. Nix only became the interim champ when he beat Stotts.
It's what I'm saying though is with how impressive he's been. And does it feel reminiscent of when Chandler used to be at the top of Bellator, or do you not feel that way?
I can sort of see it, but I'd still put Chandler above that. I think Chandler has the historical significance with Bellator, considering the number of times he was lightweight champ, considering how long he held the gold in his excellent wars with Eddie Alvarez. That's kind of a really high bar, and it's hard for somebody like Patchy Mix to get that when he's had the limited run that he has. But Patchy Mix definitely over the course of the 4 or 5 years that he's been with Bellator, he's definitely had at least one of the more successful runs. I don't know if I'd say a top 5, a top 10, but I could definitely see top 15, top 20. One of the better runs with Bellator that has been had.
For sure. So I have two things I'd like to say. He mentioned with a smile that he would love to run it back with Juan Archuleta no matter the promotion. I want to get your thoughts on that. Number one,
I
and
want to see that. I want to see that.
and number two, some sort of a good luck charm or something, because it seems like whenever I interview a fighter or take a picture with the fighter or that there's a major fight coming up, they always seem to do well. Is it me? He's simply being in the building is what it gave him the confidence to do that, or what? What do you think?
I wish I had your luck in 2019 when I was first interviewing fighters for Fansided, because I had the reverse luck where every fighter I was interviewing was losing.
No way. It's
Yeah, it took Mike freaking Perry to break that streak.
No way. That's nuts. But yeah, overall, very impressive performance. And truly, Tom, I'm going to go out on a women's hit. I think that Patchy Mix would absolutely destroy Sean O'Malley if they fought next week. I think it would. I think it
I
would.
want to see that fight now. Now that you say that, I want to see that fight.
Yeah, I do. I do. Can you say with confidence that Patchy Mix is the best bantamweight in the world, or are you not ready to go there just yet? What do you think?
He's definitely one of. I want to put him. You know what? Screw it. Yeah, I put him above O'Malley. Yeah,
You put him above O'Malley and Aljamain Sterling? That's bold. That's very bold.
I would put him. I never said Aljo, so that's why I was thinking. But
Okay, all right.
I would definitely put him on above O'Malley. I say Zan before we say mix O'Malley. Let's see if O'Malley gets past Chito Vera first, because
That's
Chito's
fair.
the only one who's beaten O'Malley before.
That's fair. That's a good point. Very good point.
Uh, let's go over to Rafian Stotts now. So this was they had all the talking, Rafian Stotts, Danny Sabatello, and Stotts ends up getting another victory. Sabatello, I want to give him credit. He definitely had more of a rush. He knew this was not a 25-minute fight. This was only a 15-minute fight, so he needed to get in the action and take control right away. But it kind of had a similar script to the first, where Stotts had all the control, and Stotts had the better grappling. Sabatello struggled with that. You know, Stotts was the better man again.
Yeah, he was definitely the better man, and I can say wholeheartedly that this was way more entertaining than their first
Oh yeah,
encounter
big
at
time.
Bellator 289. And Tom, the shift of reactionary just expressions on people's faces during this fight was crazy. At the beginning of the fight, you had 80% of the crowd watching Sabatello because Sabatello's from the area, and then by the end of the fight, everybody wanted to see Stotts win. And one of just the most anticlimactic parts is instantaneously right when the fight was over, Danny Sabatello refusing to shake Rafian Stotts' hand, and then of course Rafian Stotts' post-fight interview was just the stuff of absolute comedic gold. And I think it was the perfect bookend to a rivalry that maybe was better outside of the cage than in it. And when someone asked him in the back afterward if he would entertain a trilogy, he just for the sheer entertainment of it, he's like, anytime I get paid to beat the crap out of his face, I'll do it. Oh, it seems like if Bellator or another promotion offered him one more chance to beat Sabatello and complete the sweep, he would do it. And just to see Stotts in a really good mood and to see him compliment everyone around him and his whole team and everything, he seems to be in great spirits. And I could just tell the whole week that he was super relaxed. He wasn't nervous for him at all, and he wanted to beat him, and he did exactly that. And I think this is one of those pills that Sabatello is going to eventually have to swallow. And something tells me, even though Stotts is up 2-0, this rivalry, at least outside the cage, is far from over. And for, from a standpoint of me seeing two of the greatest impromptu press conference scuffles of all time, I want to see more of it. I've been very entertained. So
For sure,
yeah.
it was entertaining, and bad blood will spill over to like the rest of their careers potentially. But I don't know if I'm interested in a trilogy. I'm interested in a trilogy for the entertainment aspect, like he kind of alluded to.
Yeah.
But obviously, Stotts is the better fighter, and I would pick him in a trilogy fight too.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go to AJ McKee quickly, just because bad. This was the
Yeah,
one bad fight of the main card. I
yeah.
mean, and this was, and it's some, and I think Big John made the comparison when Boss Rudin fought Kevin Randleman. where the guy is on the bottom is the one who ends up winning. And for me, obviously with Boss Ruden, it was a very controversial decision, but here, I don't think there was any question. McKee was landing in the better strikes. All that blood that spilled around the cage, that was Sydney Outlaws. And this fight was not as exciting as the commentary team was trying to make it out to be. This was bad, and this was all McKee.
No, it was all McKee, and I think the only positive out of this is that McKee got his 20th win, and I think that was one of those keys that he just wanted to get out of there, and he even admitted that his performance wasn't great. He knows that he has a lot to work on, and you could just tell, or at least I could just tell after the fight, that he was disappointed in himself. He feels like he's been screwed out of this tournament. He feels like, even though he still considers himself, in his words, the face of the fight game, that that at this point in his career, he just isn't getting the same respect or similar respect that he once got when he was champion. And he just felt like, even though it was a win, he just felt like there was so much that he needed to improve on, that that if he doesn't, he's going to be in it for the long haul for a while. And yeah, as you alluded to, not had a very good fight, but then again, AJ McKee's simply the better fighter, got the job done, no matter how ugly it was, and is a win. And now we're gonna have to see what's next for him, as he's in a bit of a crowded situation. They're at the top of that division with so much looming with the Grand Prix and the uncertainty of it. There's a lot of overarching storylines than just his performance. So I think he's gonna have to sit back with his team and see what the next best thing is for him. But even though he wasn't impressed with this performance overall, it seemed like he was in good spirits. It seemed like he was glad to get the win, and I was happy to see that. So,
All right, quickly, as you mentioned the tournament, last thing, let's talk about it. Alexander Shevely defeats Patchy Pitbull. So we got the Bellator Lightweight Grand Prix. He's going over to the finals. Obviously, we already had a question about the finals last week when we talked about Usman Nurmagomedov's getting suspended 6 months for his failed drug test and not getting the exemption. So, I mean, obviously, the thought would be Alex Shevely taking on Brent Primus for an interim title and $1 million grand prize in a final. But, I mean, Zain, like you kind of alluding to, we don't even know what the fate of the lightweight Grand Prix is, because we don't exactly know what the fate of Bellator is.
yeah, and I asked Alexander that exact question, like what would you like to see happen next? And he goes, it doesn't matter who's on the other side of the bracket for me. I know I'm the better fighter, and I know I'm going to win. So I think he has the right mentality, kind of knowing, even though there's still fate to be decided with the future of Bellator. I think Alexander went into that fight knowing it was just a business trip and business as usual, and he did exactly what he needed to do in defeating a legend. As well respected and as beloved as Pitbull, and I think he knows that no matter what happens to him next, he's going to be in good standing, just considering the level of competition he's beaten. Obviously, this and being the biggest win of his career, but then again, we don't know. Ideally, though, and I did ask him in a follow up, he'd say that he wants Usman ideally, but if they can't get it done for whatever reason, given his suspension, he's down to fight whoever Bellator or PFL or another promotion says that he needs to fight. So there's that. So,
all right. So overall, Zain, you're one last thing here, just in a couple of quick sentences. If this is the end, what is Bellator's legacy?
Bellator's legacy is that they were able to build homegrown talent, to make them into big stars, to move on to the next stage of their careers. I would say that's number one. They kept the spirit of legends alive, such as Fedor Emelianenko, Rampage Jackson, former champions like Ben Henderson, and the like. I think another part of Bellator's legacy is that, Bellator was that one promotion on the block that, not a lot of people really knew about, but if you were, flipping through the channels on a random Thursday or Friday night and came across a really entertaining Bellator fight, and you stopped and watched it, and you were really curious as to what Bellator even was, I think that's what got people interested in it. It was literally, that's how I started to know about it too, was I actually heard about Bellator through, when Twitter was still becoming a thing and everybody was talking about, Chandler versus Alvarez and stuff. So that's how I did my digging to learn about it. And I think one of the third or fourth thing that I think is important to know about Bellator's legacy is for many people in the MMA media industry, myself included. Bellator gave us a platform to allow us to cover live events for the first time. So for that perspective, I'm very grateful. And that Bellator or another promotion like them, but I would say mainly Bellator is the catalyst for it. It can serve as a springboard to help MMA media members' careers. So and I think that's another way that their legacy will always will always be remembered and will always be cherished by MMA fans around the world. And truly, I guess the last thing I can say is that I'm very grateful because without them, I don't think I would have had the experiences that I've had over the last year, and I'm sure that a lot of my MMA media colleagues who have been to several events feel the exact same way. So again, I just want to send my sincere thanks and sincere gratitude to everyone there, and just being truly the best at what they do and being on class. And if this is the end, it is a promotion I will dearly miss.
Okay, let me give some full disclosure. If you were watching on our video feed, you definitely have seen a big reduction in video quality. You may have even seen a reduction in audio quality if you're listening on our audio-only platforms and if you're watching us on YouTube. I will be very blunt. I have tried to record this ending about 20 times now. Like 5 or so with Zain as we were trying to wrap our original recording of episode 62 part 1 together. And then we were having a whole bunch of internet connectivity issues, and I tried to do this report by myself. And then 10 or 15 times I could not get this to work, whether it be because the video didn't record or more connection issues or this or that. If you can't tell by my face, I am spent. So we are just going to try and get through this part right now. Here are my quick thoughts on Bellator, if this truly was the last one with Bellator 301. Alright, I know Bellator has been a bit of a butt of a joke for some of MMA Twitter over the last few years, last decade probably. If a fighter loses 3 fights in a row, well, he's probably headed over to Bellator. If a fighter signs with Bellator, well, it's not as good as the UFC. Or lack of promotion for certain cards and fights, that one is fair. That one is fair. I have talked about that. Zain has talked about that. But I want to turn your attention to a recent tweet from Sean Sheehan, who basically said that the UFC, in a world full of UFC, and the UFC is number 1 in the world for a reason. They are the best promotion, perceived best at least. They are the biggest promotion, most popular promotion for a very significant reason. However, when you have, like Sean pointed out, when you have cards like we had this past weekend with UFC Vegas 82, that was not a good card. You think about Bellator, and you think about what it provides, and not just Bellator, but PFL, One Championship, Ryzen, all of them. Listen, they are an alternate product for fans, and they are an alternate product for fighters. So think about it. In a world full of UFC, getting to watch a Bellator card, or PFL card, or One Championship card, it's different. It's different. It's different in terms of the fighters that they have. It's different in terms of the rule set that they have. It's different in terms of the scoring for some. Specifically talking about One Championship, back in the old Pride days, they didn't follow the 10-point must system. So it's a great alternative for fans. Different styles, different products, different eyes. But it's also great for the fighters as well when you consider, hey, if you don't need the UFC. Fedor Emelianenko did not need the UFC. He was a legend in the sport. He competed in Pride. He competed in Bellator. He never competed in the UFC. So for the fighters, it's great because you can start to carve your own legacy, or continue to carve your legacy, continue to work on your craft and earn popularity, and continue to work on yourself in promotions other than the UFC. It's a place to, make money and to still be a professional fighter without the need of the UFC. And you think about all the positives that Bellator has brought us. Bellator has brought us great moments, great fights, and fighters. You got some homegrown talent like Zain was talking about. So like the Pitbull brothers and AJ McKee, before they went over to the UFC, Michael Chandler and Eddie Alvarez. They earned their names, or helped to build some of their legacy through Bellator. Chandler and Alvarez competed in two of the greatest fights in Bellator history. Bellator has had some great fights. They've had great fighters, great moments, great champions. You think about guys and gals that went over to Bellator, even if they weren't originally in Bellator, like Gegard Mousasi, Rory McDonald, Chris Cyborg, and they all became champions. And Bellator, again, like I said, has some great champions in its history. So here's the thing with Bellator. If this is the end, at the very least, Bellator 301 was exciting. I also want to give a big shout out, like other people have, to the Bellator PR team, CJ, Danny, and all of them. When I was starting to try to build myself more in the MMA sphere, like when I had started with Fansided, they had given me time. They have allowed me to talk to fighters. I thank the fighters for their time. I thank all the Bellator PR for what they have done, and everybody behind the scenes at Bellator for their work with all that they did for the promotion. If this truly is the end, my heart goes out to them. And if this truly was the end, then with Bellator, all I can say is it's been a phenomenal 15 years with you. Here's to you, regardless of what the future holds. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of episode 62. Part 1 of episode 62 of the MMA Outsiders. Join us again for part 2 in our normal time slot, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I also want to give a shout out, a little quick plug, to a special live stream that Empty the Bench is doing on Monday night, tomorrow night, if you are watching us on our original date that we're putting this out, Sunday the 19th. So Monday, November 20th, Monday Night Football, Eagles, Chiefs. Most of the Football Friday crew will be there. Nick Morris will be there. Zain Bando will be there. I do not know as of this time if I will be there. But most of the Football Friday crew will be there. So make sure to tune in for a little watch along. Should be a great time. All right, let me put a quick bow on this. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Facebook, X, Instagram at MMA Outsiders ETB. Follow the network at Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. My co-host, as always, is Zain Bando, writer for BJPenn.com, MMA Knockout. You can follow him at Zambando99 on social media. I'm Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fanside MMA and MMA News, and with the PFL this weekend with their PFL World Championships card. You can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. All right, that's going to do it. Join us for part 2 on Tuesday night. We're going to talk about the PFL World Championships and so much more. Until then, we hope to see you then. But until then, be Joe Piper. Good night, everyone.